All right, everyone, it's time to weigh in on my thoughts about the alt-right, alt-light competing rallies in D.C. yesterday and the fallout from it, which was part amusing and in part just bore out what I predicted could happen with regards to some of these social movements. On Twitter thereafter, specifically between Richard Spencer and Mike Cernovich, who sort of represent those competing viewpoints. What happened, in short, is that there was going to be a rally for free speech, and a bunch of people signed up to speak there. And then Richard Spencer signed on, and a lot of people didn't like that, Cernovich and Fairbanks and so forth, and they said, well, no, we're alt-light, and so they held their own rally against political violence. Antifa showed up, and then they had their own rally, whose name escapes me at the moment. I think there was a fourth competing rally at the same time, if I remember correctly. Could be wrong on that. It could have been a splinter group. So the entire event, which originally was about, hey, we want free speech, devolved from there into essentially people on the far right, like the identitarian side, saying yes, free speech, people on the far left, like the anarcho-communists, saying, oh, acceptable speech, and then people in the alt-light saying rally against both of these groups because of political violence. By the way, hate speech is not free speech. Someone was waving a sign at the alt-light rally that said that. I don't know whether that was someone who was not just an agent provocateur or something like that, so, some plant or something from the left or the further right. I don't know, and I'm not even going to bother speculating. But this is something that I predicted could happen. In fact, I spoke of it not even a week ago, specifically, that what would happen, potentially, is that as these movements centralize further, they can start attacking one another. That the various right-wing groups that sprang up originally just to oppose the left, the establishment old guard left along with the neoconservatives in the country, would then begin attacking one another over minor differences between these different groups. For instance, Spencer is an identitarian. Some of these others that declare themselves alt-light, they're not identitarians, they're civic nationalists, or they're just conservatives of a general brand. Therefore, they fight over that difference without realizing that what drove the growth of all of these movements in the first place was really the death of the old guard neoliberals and their excesses, abuses, and their constant wedge issue haranguing. This also drove the growth of libertarianism. Gary Johnson may have been a poor candidate to field, albeit originally a pragmatic one, as I estimated myself. But the Libertarian Party did end up tripling its vote share, did achieve double-digit support in many states, and became more or less a viable minor party within the United States in the course of a single election. Can you imagine what would have happened if they had gone with somebody who was perhaps a little bit better spoken and maybe slightly more of a purist on the minarchist side of things? I say, for instance, for myself, my opposition to the left, a lot of people assume that this makes me a member of the alt-right or alt-light or something like that, or makes me a racialist or something. My opposition to the neoliberal left comes in several forms. I oppose authoritarianism, which is a shared value with some elements of the far right, so I'm not sure where people get that I'm a member of those groups. Just because I speak with Red Ice or Richard Spencer doesn't mean I'm on the alt-right myself. Authoritarianism, number one. The degradation of a culture that I happen to be part of, number two, not for racial reasons, not even necessarily for what you would consider civic nationalist reasons, but I believe that liberty is the primary founding goal of the United States. So when the neoliberals say, oh, we're going to have hate speech laws and politically correct everything and attack the alt media, that's a problem to me. It's going to bring me into general alignment, at least on those issues, with people outside the establishment. They could be social justice warriors, and we would sync on that issue as much as I would with the alt-right. And for months, people have said, oh, talk about Jews or something like that. It's never been part of the stuff that I talk about. Then, in the third place, beyond just the general abuse and the denigration of the Constitution that I see from the neoliberal left, it's just not pragmatic. Economic plan doesn't work. Moral plan is basically neoconservatives 2.0. Their presidential candidate, as a senator, was running basically against gay marriage, said, I'm going to bomb Iran. She sounded a lot like John McCain in 2008. She sounded exactly the same. Clinton versus McCain would have been even closer than Obama versus McCain, even though they were similar on at least 75% of issues. Oh, I'm going to raise taxes 1%. No, I want to lower taxes 1%. It's the same fucking shit. It's the same thing that's destroying our nation. So when I see that Cernovich and Spencer in particular are sparring, they're like posting competing tweets. Richard Spencer posted one about the alt-light, saying, oh, their rally's tiny, haha, you lose, your butt hurt. Cernovich responds by saying, behold the alt-right, and posting a picture of some nerdy person who's listening to Spencer, and it just devolves from there into insults. This is exactly what happened with the old guard left, you do realize. That is, different competing schools failed to get together. They failed to amalgamate during the election, denying Hillary Clinton the presidency. Ultimately, Hillary Clinton was denied the presidency almost more because of holdout Democrats that stopped being partisan because they felt shafted than any finesse on Trump's part. I still think he would have won even if that schism hadn't happened. And even with the never Trump Republican issue, I think he still would have eked out a win. But would he have turned all of those parts of the Rust Belt red? I don't think so. I think he would have been in danger of losing Florida at least at that point. That I think was the closest, maybe Michigan or something like that. The map would have looked a little bit different. The left right now is devouring itself. The Democratic Party has no leader. It has no platform. They're beyond the point at which they can reasonably respond to what's going on because they have no single ideology to follow. This is a strength for outside of establishment movements to be more malleable and maneuverable as they do soul searching, as they try to find what their platforms are actually going to be. That's, again, what helped the new right. Within an establishment, it's a very, very bad thing not to have any real platform leadership or even really stable ideology as the Democrats currently have. That's the one thing that might save these smaller movements from being utterly butt blasted, is the fact that the leftist opposition they rallied around to attack in the first place, which amalgamated them together, is more or less absent and unable to defend itself. So even the smallest, even if they spend 90% of their time stabbing one another in the back, like Richard Spencer and Mike Cernovich having a shouting match or something, even if they only infrequently are attacking the establishment's basically dying anyway. I mean, it's like beating a dead horse to go after them at this point because we're undergoing a major social paradigm shift. As social alienation among the left inclines because Trump happens to be the president, assuming, in essence, I'll make another statement here actually instead. This is an important point. If Trump continues to fail to really accomplish anything, his re-election chances might be higher in 2020 than if he actually gets support from his own party. Now, why would this be the case? It sounds paradoxical. It's because he can't incline the social alienation of the left and drive them towards renewal if he's not actually doing anything for them to rally around. They don't have an actual target and they're too busy fighting one another. He would have to take significant steps towards his basic platform in order to get them to focus back on him again and actually attempt to wage a campaign. The midterms for the Democrats now are basically lost. It's a little bit too late for them, I think, to choose a leader. They're probably doomed unless something major occurs. 2020, though, if Trump starts getting his way a little bit more, might actually look better for the Democrats if he does accomplish some of his goals, because it re-solidifies at least the left. Now, it also potentially gives Trump centrist support. That would be a different issue. That would be a balancing factor there. When we're talking about politics, we've got to remember the fundamental truth that the only thing that will remain stable is that nothing remains stable in politics. It changes all the time. The left's inability to recognize the paradigm shift that we were undergoing in the last election is one of the main reasons why they lost. It's one of the main reasons that so many polls were wrong. It's one of the main reasons they still haven't figured it out, so they keep losing the special elections and looking at fucked up polls too. And they're going to keep doing that for some time. If they keep doing it into the midterms, they're definitely doomed. And they probably will. There's a good chance that they will. Meanwhile, though, the alt-right has destabilized. And it's destabilized because it's become more central in one aspect. It's already schismed the alt-right aside. and now they're directly fighting with one another. Thus you lead to a situation in where proponents of these different ideologies, which aren't fundamentally that much different, as opposed to maybe the neoliberals, the neoconservatives, instead of focusing on them, they focus on differences between one another. As they continue infighting, proponents of both keep telling me, like when I weighed in on it last night and was chuckling about this whole situation, they'll say, oh no, it is inevitable that the alt-right will win over and reabsorb the alt-light. It is objectively fated to be true that our ideology will become the dominant one. We will purge the neocons. We will be in command forever into a glorious white identitarian future. The alt-right says the alt-right ultimately will be rejected by the U.S. public because it's too far out there. We represent a more mild form of reform from neoconservatism and neoliberalism. We will be the main ones. We will supplant those, begin absorbing the marginal groups thereof, rise above the alt-right, and then eventually absorb them instead as the pragmatic alternative. I have to say, I doubt that either of these things will actually happen, because they'll be too busy fighting one another. And you look, once you get that bad blood and people begin attacking one another within these similar movements, they're going to keep doing it. They're vying for control. They're vying for a limited audience rather than attempting to reach out to garner a larger audience, even as their own movements technically are still growing. This then drives schisms as well, secondary schisms. You could get an alt-right movement that feels more or less sympathetic towards their alt-right compatriots. You could get the same thing within the alt-right. You could get other groups perturbing and causing the same thing. You could get expat social justice warriors who feel shafted by the Democratic Party, who will never re-enter the Democratic Party, joining either movement and changing it further. It would be like, look at the parallel with the Libertarian Party. Gary Johnson's style of libertarianism recognized that Hillary Clinton was so vastly unpopular that there were a lot of leftists who fundamentally only wanted to legalize marijuana that they could absorb into the libertarian movement. Thus, they fixed the platform of the Libertarian Party, what was focused on or what was said in the first place, to focus on trying to draw those former Democrats on board. Now, this partially worked, but it also denigrated the fabric of what had been legitimate libertarianism. So libertarianism went from a very patriotic movement to one that devolved into, we will legalize weed, we will throw open the borders, and bake the fucking cake. That's what Gary Johnson's libertarianism became. It's not libertarianism. It's certainly not monarchism. It's not anarcho-capitalism. It has very little in common with actual libertarianism after any recognizable strain. It's basically just a form of centrism that has a few small government trappings and is sort of the missing link between the older libertarian movement and modern establishment politics of pre-paradigm shift times. That's what actually happened. Now, that may prove stable. It would still be an improvement over neoconservatives and neoliberals, and it can grow. But it's not the same as the original movement. You get these constant shifts. Whenever you label a movement, it's subject to change. That is, the ideologies, the central figures, they change all the time. It's the way politics works. The only other alternative is total stagnation. That will kill a movement off faster. It will either change or it will die. But as it changes, it compromises itself. It leads to the rise of purists versus reformists, and it does this constantly. This happens within religion too. It happens within any human endeavor. It happens within technology. You get the rise of some new system, taking off of an old one. It might retain a core of what it used to be, but it's no longer exactly the same as it was before. So with the Democrats ailing, basically the sick man of U.S. politics, modified libertarianism and purist libertarianism growing, the alt-light and alt-right growing while also attacking one another, increasingly disenfranchised, I would say, under 35 Democrats, either becoming Trump Republicans or identitarians or reverting into classical liberalism and going back to the pre-JFK era. Right now, all of U.S. politics is totally in flux. And making the mistake, here's the biggest mistake anybody who is a proponent of a movement can make. To declare it objective, to declare it to be fated, to declare it to be provably better than some other movement on a subjective moral basis. When you begin doing this, you show the weakness of a movement. The left made this mistake. What I see in the response to me when I pointed out that I predicted this coming fight between the alt-right and the alt-light and associated movements, what I see is that people within both the alt-right and alt-light are fundamentally making the same claim. They're claiming, no, our movement will objectively be the one that wins, because this other group, the alt-light would say the alt-right's too far out there. The alt-right would say the alt-light are basically sellouts. And so they make the same claim, but it's never an objective claim. It's only ever a subjective one. It's only objective to people who already believe in that ideology. Ideologies make this mistake all the time. Christians make it, Muslims make it, Jews make it. Every religion under the sun makes it. Every political affiliation makes it. To a communist, communism is self-evident. To anybody outside of communism, it's a screwy, mentally deranged ideology. Happens all the time. And people keep trying to fit me into their labels too. I'll have to talk about that later, with regards to Rational Wiki and some of this other crap that happens online. People try to pigeonhole me into their ideologies. I'm constantly getting people saying, talk about this issue. Stop talking about those issues. Oh, you need to focus on this one aspect of U.S. politics. There's this one group of people you need to be harder on. There's this one group you should exonerate for some moral reason. Happens all the time. I criticize Christianity, and all of a sudden Christians who believe that they politically coincide with what I believe in say, oh, you should let up off it. Islam's the real problem. I talk about the problems with multinational banks or corporatism or authoritarian abuse the world over. Oh, well, you didn't talk about Jews enough this week. You know, you should go full 1488 or something like that. Or the Republic, you should be a partisan Republican because it's really your allies against the abusive left. Or you should call out Trump more because he's a sellout neocon. Or you should support Trump more and not question him because, you know, MAGA praise CAC or something like that. It's like I'm sitting back here. All I did during the election was analyze things and give my opinions. And I'm going to keep giving my opinions, and everyone keeps trying to take those opinions and trappings of my ideology that are themselves technically malleable too, and they try to fit it into their little categories that other people have made. No, I'm just a sticksist. It is what I believe in. Whatever I happen to believe in, that's my ideology. Why don't I just create a label for it too, since everybody else does? You keep getting these uprising movements that make up these little fun and game sort of labels for themselves to make it seem like a secret club or something exciting that will reform the world, will change the world this time. Probably not. There's a fairly low chance. Paradigms can be overthrown constantly. We see it happening now. But that doesn't mean that any specific sub-movement that's participating in this change rises up and becomes permanently dominant within the United States or the West at large. It just doesn't. It's like some uprising liberal movement in China saying, oh, we're going to win this time, and China will be liberal, and communism will be banned, will be free market and stuff. Don't hold your breath. It's possible, but at any given moment in time, it's unlikely. Establishments take time to overhaul, and the other great risk follows. The other great risk at the end of each paradigm shift is that the new movements that have taken control become the new establishment and slip back into the same old shit that happened before. That's the other problem. My views are simply, I am pro-liberty, I'm against war, I'm against censorship, I certainly support the internet and everything free speech about that, free expression. I'm not in favor, for the most part, of identity politics. I fit in much more with classical liberalism or libertarianism than I do any of the new right sort of movements. Parts of the new right coincide much more with my mindset than others. That doesn't mean that I can't talk to somebody who proclaims themselves an identitarian or a Nazi, any less than I can talk to somebody who proclaims themselves a communist. If I'm talking to a communist, I may be able to find certain moral issues on which we agree, probably something like abortion or gay marriage, maybe green energy or something along those lines. But that doesn't mean that I have anything in common with the core ideology as a whole. As far as Rational Wiki goes, they've decided to overlook this. I'll make a video on that later. I think the site's in read-only mode, though, right now. And before anyone launches off into some crazy shit, I'm actually working with the other people editing the article, so it's not a big issue. It's just a matter of it takes time. When you're talking about a wiki-based site, there are multiple people editing it, they're reverting one another, you get into an edit war. That's just sort of what happens. But I'll speak on that. I'll speak directly to Rational Wiki at some time in the future if the need arises. That's about all. Peace out.